Boyd, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
You bet. Always good to be with you, Liz.
Okay, the Des Moines Register picked Marco Rubio to endorse as their Republican candidate. Let's talk about why they said they picked him. They had some pretty good reasons. First of all, they talked about his vision for a new American century, which, as you know, he talks about a lot. But critics would say that could be just Obama's hope and change message repackaged. What do you say?
I think Marco has a really interesting place to play. He does have that natural Reagan-esque ability to talk about a bigger, brighter future. But I do think he also has some substance under some of those policies. And that's the real critical thing. We can't just go on rhetoric and spin. We actually have to have some substance to go along with a lot of that style. So I think that will be the test for Marco in Iowa is can he convince people that he's not just a flash, but he also has a real forward-looking path with some policies to back it up.
Right, and one of those policies would be his economic policy, which I like. I think he understands that the free market is best for our nation, that it'll create more jobs. My one issue with his economic plan is the highest tax rate, and that's at 30%. How will he be able to explain that to voters so it doesn't sound to them like he's promising one thing to lower taxes and then enacting another, continuing a high tax rate?
I think one of the really fascinating parts of Marco's tax plan, which he's worked on with Senator Lee for the last several years, is that it does come down to two rates. And so it is a process to get, I think, to the fairer, flatter levels that we all want to get to. But I think the appealing thing that Marco will make the case on is that he reduces the marriage penalty, and then he also gets rid of the parent tax penalty, one we often don't talk about as Republicans, to really level the playing field for those hardworking moms and dads out there. And I think that will play very well in Iowa.
So essentially then, even though the top rate is 30%, with some of these deductions, it'll make the essential rate lower than that. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, now the Des Moines Register also mentioned his social programs, maybe as it refers to independence, drawing new independence into the conservative movement as well. That was one of the reasons they picked Rubio. When they mention social programs, what are they talking about? Are they talking about his immigration plan?
I think there's a broad range there. I think he's looking at some things that are very important for Republicans and conservatives to be talking about, and that is how do we end these social programs that are often trapping people in poverty because of government, often for generations at a time. And I think what Marco's trying to do is to say, look, we need to talk about poverty. We need to talk about upward mobility. And we need to talk about a glide path for people to get them off social programs, back to work, and really independence and what the American dream is all about.
Right, putting government in the place of being a safety net, not being a permanent welfare state. All right, now let's talk about his experience. I always find this hypocritical when any media talks about the experience of Republican candidates because they had no issue the last 8 years with a lack of experience from one Barack Obama when he was running. But the Des Moines Register did say something about his experience. In your opinion, is this going to be an issue if he's up against Hillary in the general election?
Actually, I don't, because experience all experience is not equal. Some people can have 5 years of experience in a single year. Some people don't get 5 years of experience in a lifetime. And I think Hillary's experience, unfortunately, is a record of failure over and over and over again. So I don't think the record's going to be an issue for Marco.
Yeah, I don't either, but they did bring that up. All right, we have new polls coming out tomorrow before the debate, but from our January 13th Iowa polls, those are our latest. Rubio was in 4th place in Iowa with 5%. Is that enough to sustain his campaign?
I think so. I think he's got an approach that will take him long past Iowa, and I think everybody's looking well past Iowa now. It is first, and so it does get a lot of attention, but I think he's got a path that goes way past Iowa, well into New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Watch Nevada for Marco Rubio. That's going to be very important for him.
All right, let's turn to the Democrat that the Des Moines Register chose to endorse. We have a video of that, so let's take a look.
By that measure, Democrats have one outstanding candidate, Hillary Clinton. No other candidate can match her knowledge and experience. She is not a perfect candidate, as evidenced by the way she has handled the furor over her private email server. In our 2008 endorsement of her, the Register wrote that when she makes a mistake, she should just say so.
Yeah, me too. I wish Hillary would just come out and admit wrongdoing, but I'm realistic here. Were you surprised that they endorsed her?
A little bit, but it's a big paper. They're going to choose who they think is going to sell the most papers and what's going to be the safest play there for them as an organization. And I do think it's interesting that they point out the trustworthy factor with Hillary. There's something that's really lacking in our politics today. It's that courageous vulnerability, that courage to say, yeah, the buck does stop here. The courage to say, yeah, I did make a mistake and here's why. And frankly, I think that's why so few Americans trust government anymore, because no one is willing to have the courage to say, hey, I made a mistake. Everything is poll approved, consultant certified, and that's a big problem.
Right, and in a culture where we don't tend to trust politicians regardless of who they are or what they've done, I think the humility of saying, hey, yeah, I made a mistake here, or I realize what would happen if we enacted this policy and I want to change because of that, that actually builds credibility in the eyes of the voters rather than making the candidate lose face or lose credibility. So I'm not sure that applies to her because she's actually done wrong things, not just made mistakes. But I think that's something that's vastly missing from politics today. We talked about her experience. Oh, go ahead.
I was saying, and it takes out an authenticity that the American people are also just dying to have. Just that authenticity that comes from being honest and straightforward with people rather than trying to hide behind some political spin.
Right, and I think that was one of the things, that's one of the things I like about Marco Rubio, the other candidate endorsed by the Des Moines Register, is when he got involved with his immigration stuff several years ago, he came out afterward and said, this was a mistake, I learned from it, I was trying to do what was best, it didn't work, let's move on. And I didn't agree with his immigration things at the time. I gained a lot of respect for him that he was able to admit that he'd made a mistake and move on from there rather than allowing it to ruin his career. Now, the Des Moines Register talked about Hillary's experience. Like you said, it's a resume of failure and corruption. I was surprised they didn't endorse Bernie because he has that newfound popularity. And I wonder if this was a lesser of the two evils for them, because when they were interviewing Bernie, they asked him how he would enact his radical policies, and he didn't really have a way to enact it. He just said, well, you can't just elect me, you have to change the whole structure of government. That's pretty extreme.
That's a pretty tall order to change the entire system of government that we functioned on for over 200 years now. It is interesting, though, because there are a lot of self-declared socialists in Iowa. And I think that's part of where Bernie's got some of his momentum there. But as we know, eventually Bernie has to realize that he is going to run out of other people's money. That's the problem with socialism. And so that's why we've got to get back to the conservative base and those principles that have actually helped more people get out of poverty than anything in the history of the world.
Right, all of our wallets are certainly going to be feeling the burn if he's elected. Let me ask you about endorsements. There have been a lot of endorsements the last week or two. How important do you think those are? I mean, Trump scored some endorsements like Sarah Palin or evangelical leader Jerry Falwell Jr., Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Is that going to make a difference for him?
No. I'm one of those people who just does not believe. No one goes into the voting booth and pulls a lever because of an endorsement. Now, I do think they are important, especially early on in a campaign, because what they do is they create space. They create an opportunity for people to maybe reassess their opinion of someone based on an endorsement. And so, yes, an endorsement by a governor or by a sitting senator or something like that can have an impact in that it creates space. But the candidate has to drive through with policies and process and all the things that really matter to the voter in the end. So a little window of help, yes, but not when someone actually gets into that voting booth.
Right, I agree. It increases campaign capacity because you get another surrogate. You get all those people who will come to an event based off of the endorser, not just the endorsee. But I don't think that these endorsements, especially in this day and age, don't make that much difference anymore. Boyd, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's always great to talk to you. Hope you come back again soon.